Angels of Death, Part 1. What? Are you safe? Twilight cried. You're the one getting shot at by Necrons and you're asking if I'm safe. Mashes replied. Regardless, we've moved into a narrower orbit near the southern hemisphere of Solemnus, that should keep us out of sight of the Necrons and the traitors long enough for you to get out of there. We're scanning the planet now to see if we can direct you to an exit. We can always try for the portal we came through to get here. Twilight offered. Assuming that the Xenos did not scramble its programming so you can't get out, there was a pause, Twilight feeling a tremor running through the ground beneath her feet. Want to, The traitors managed to get a few ships through in it, ships at the planet. What? Mashes, I can't hear you. The traitors are literally throwing ships at the planet. I just saw a squadron of them make a run through the Necron fleet and crash into the surface. A pause. We've been spotted. I guess we didn't move out of sight enough. I'll alert Mugos Eril to scan for you when you make it to the surface. Be careful out there. I will. Twilight closed the Vox and turned back to the others. Girls, we've got traitors incoming. Let them come. Ruth bellowed, smashing her bolter into the face of a Necron that got too close. The Empress' wrath burns in my soul, and I shall be happy to let it shine for Xenos and heretics alike. But failing our mission because we did not get the unbound flame to the Empress will do us no good. Naomi snapped, reloading as she ducked closer to the unbound flame. Do you have a way out? Sort of. Twilight replied, giving the Sister Superior a sheepish grin. We need to get back to the portal we came through to get here. Once we get back to the surface, we'll return to the ship and get out of this system. How are we supposed to do that? Veronica cried, ducking down as a bolt of gauze fire carved through one of her pauldrons. We are skilled, but not skilled enough to fight through so many Necrons. I have a plan, Twilight said, looking through the phalanx. When I give the signal, start running towards the portal. I'll do what I can to clear us a path. But what if the Necrons have tampered with the portal when we get there? Judith asked. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Everyone get ready, this is going to be rough. Yes, Tara. Twilight shifted her magic around once more, building up power once more. The Necrons still could not break through her shield, so correcting that to push forward and knock them down would give them enough time to move towards the portal and perhaps take some of their attackers out of the equation. She might need to set the unbound flame down, but picking it back up would not be too difficult. You can do this, Twilight, she thought. Maybe you might be able to snag a few more relics on the way out? Okay. Now, the sisters broke cover as Twilight thrust her hand forward, her shield shifting to a single wall and racing towards the phalanx. The Necrons realized the danger but were too slow to react, only a few managing to move back before the purple barrier smashed into them, limbs and guns flying about as Twilight's magic blasted on through. Judith and Mirshen took point, their flamers burning the Necrons before they could reassemble properly. Twilight came next, the unbound flame grasped in her telekinesis as she hurried as quickly as she could. Ruth, Veronica, and Rebecca took up the rear, their bolters clattering as they tried to keep down any Necrons that the front ranks had missed. To Twilight's dismay, that was quite a few of the machines. They were halfway to the portal when the ground shook once more. Twilight gave a yelp, almost dropping the unbound flame as her magic flickered from her broken concentration. Ruth rushed to her to steady her, the two holding fast as the tremors died down once more. That's no kind of ordnance I'm familiar with, the sister said as they started moving again. Mashes said the fleet's literally throwing ships at the planet, Twilight replied, shifting her shield as a rank of Necrons teleported to her left. I have no idea why, but it's certainly not making our escape any easier. Let us not think too long on the strategy of traitors, Mirshen said from up front, just as he stabbed a larger Necron through the chest with his spear. The machine staggered back, already healing from the wound the Forge Father had given it, but could not retaliate before the spear's blade went through its head. For what it was worth, an identical Necron stepped up as the wounded one was whisked away for repairs. This one got under Mirshen's next strike, deflecting it with its shield before slashing upward with its sword. Mirshen stumbled back, blasting the Necron in the face with his gauntlet as he inspected the cut along his abdomen. Mir Shen. Are you alright? Twilight asked, rushing to the Forge Father's side. I have suffered far worse, he replied, pulling himself to his full height as the Necrons closed in, battering against Twilight's shifted shield. I am sorry that I have not been of more use to you in this endeavor. Believe me, you've been beyond helpful. Twilight thrust her power forward, blasting back a score of Necrons while the sisters advanced. Ahead, Twilight could see the portal, still shimmering with power but flanked on either side by heavily armed Necrons. Naomi and Ruth took point pouring fire into the machines that held the portal, but their bolters could only do so much against the living metal of the Necrons. The Necrons hammered her shield, heavier weapons leaving visible cracks in its surface. More of the Xenos machines warped in, mainly melee variants whose weapons could more reliably pass through Twilight's defense. They still held, but Twilight could feel her shield weakening with every strike. The portal was out of reach. They needed to get out of there. I need to teleport us out of here, Twilight said, shifting her shield once more to encompass the entire group. No, Miss Terra. Mir Shen said, striking down one Necron that managed to push through Twilight's shield. The Necron defenses could repel you. You could be killed. We're not going to get to the portal, and we can't fight off all these Necrons. Twilight countered, just as a blast of fire smacked into her shoulder. The magic within her armor held, but the purple metal noticeably thinned from the strike. Please, Mir Shen, I have to try. The Forge Father remained silent for several moments, regarding Twilight as she pleaded. It was impossible to tell his expression behind his helmet, but Twilight had seen enough to sense trepidation. Finally, just as another rank of Necrons crashed against her shield, he nodded. Whatever will save the unbound flame, and your life, he said. Twilight nodded, shifting her feet as she did her best to clear her mind. Immediately she could feel feedback pressing against her, a nulling wall pressing against her soul as she tried to break through. She grimaced, feeling more magic building up behind her with nowhere to go, her shield flickering and allowing more Necron fire to slip through. Terra? The shield's failing, called one sister. Twilight could not tell which one. What are you doing? Twilight screamed as she found a break, pouring all her power through the break so she and the others would make it through. There was a flash, and Trazen's gallery disappeared from view, replaced instead by the metal field of Solemnus' surface. They had come out on a small ridge, surrounded by two inactive pylons and a few stray scarabs clinging to the shadows. No true threats to be seen. For what it was worth. Twilight gasped, sinking down to the ground as the others tried to regain their focus. Naomi and Rebecca held each other up while Veronica ripped her helmet off and vomited, spitting out small droplets of bile and blood as she tried to regain her composure. Terra! Naomi gasped. What did you do? I had to get us out, Twilight said, her voice no more than a hoarse whisper. I'm sorry. Everything within her hurt, stabbing pain lancing through her lungs with every breath she took. A cough left a spray of blood on her lips, but she was too weak to wipe it away. She could not move, just stare blankly ahead as Rebecca hurried over to her, running the element of kindness down Twilight's body to try and heal whatever damage remained. As the sister remained there for almost a minute, it was quite a lot. I can't see within you, Rebecca said. But if this is telling me anything, you practically flayed yourself getting us out of there. Twilight said nothing, just taking a few shorter breaths now that the pain had died down. So focused was she on breathing again that she almost did not notice Rebecca smacking her across the face. Don't ever do anything like that again. I won't. Twilight replied, taking Rebecca's hand as the sister helped her back to her feet. As Rebecca moved to the others, Twilight reached for her vox. Mashes? Mashes, are you there? Terra. Mashes replied. How did you get on the surface so fast? You didn't teleport, did you? That doesn't matter. Where's the ship? Mugos Aril's been circling as best he can. I'm sending your coordinates. Mashes was cut off by a burst of static. Damn it, they're targeting our comms. We'll get you back, Terra, just hang on for a little longer. We will. Twilight replied, just as the Vox winked out. Suddenly the ground shook, the air ringing with the sound of twisting metal as something landed nearby. Twilight raised her shield again, spinning towards the source of the sound in preparation to fight. Standing over them was the red-skinned giant she had seen when treating Angelique, carried forward on blue-feathered wings. He was twice as tall as Celestia, clad in armor of silver and gold that covered his chest and legs. A horned crown framed his face, holding back a thick mane of black hair that swept down his back. In his left hand he carried a long silver halberd, the capeche-like blade wreathed in blue fire. His hands and feet were like a bird's feet, and Twilight could have sworn he had an extra eye in the palm of his right hand. Or not, considering he only had one eye on his face, the other socket a blank slate of red skin. The giant pulled himself up to his full height, glaring down at the humans as if they were naught but bothersome insects. The monster on the banks of the river Rynn had been one thing. This was worse. You, he rumbled, aiming his halberd at Twilight's head. What are you, child? Magnus watched passively as the first wave of Alpharius volunteers crashed against the Necron defenses. Strike cruiser and battle barges commanded by overeager traders and sleeper agents rushed towards the planet, only to be shot to pieces by the overwhelming firepower of Xenos Archaeotech. The actual forces of the Alpha Legion, along with a few other space hulks Magnus had enslaved to his will, remained at the edge of the battle, blasting away at whatever ships drew close. Which one do you find to be the most expendable? Alpharius said from behind him. Does it matter? Magnus asked. They are not my sons, nor do you seem to have much care for them. Why should I care which ones you wish to sacrifice? While your point is well founded, the Primarch of the Alpha Legion replied. If you were to choose, which one? Magnus studied the fleet, tracing the outline of every remaining ship as they tried to cause some lasting damage to the Necron armada that stood in their way. In regards to battling the Xenos, speed and firepower were key, and any that lacked in either category were systematically singled out and torn asunder by gravity whips and massive gauze relays. Already a ring of scrap had started to form around Solemnus, the final resting place for untold millions of Chaos worshippers martyring themselves before the guns of the Xenos. And they would love him for it, for their masters would make it to the surface. That squadron, Magnus said, pointing to one group of strike cruisers at the edge of the melee. They have not committed themselves because they see themselves redundant among the other squadrons. An excellent choice. Alpharius said. Can you do me a great favor and force them to crash into the planet? Magnus quirked an eyebrow up at this, but for a scheme it was one of Alpharius' tamest. He reached out with his hand, casting his soul across the void until he touched the minds of the captains. What is this? One mind asked. Have the dark gods come to witness my ascension? Hardly, Magnus replied, reaching further until he found the flickering lights of the captain's soul. A single push, and he had snuffed them to be replaced by constructs of his own. Crash your ships into the planet and open your warp drives, for I have commanded it. I do as I am commanded, the captains droned in unison. Slowly, the squadron broke from the ranks of their fellows, shimmering as they prepared their short jumps into warp space. Some of the Necron ships noticed the shift, some of their cruiser-class vessels moving to intercept, but it was too late. The Chaos vessels accelerated, flashing in and out of reality as the overtaxed warp drives sent them hurling towards the planet beneath. Magnus waited, watching the surface of Solemnus for any sign of activity. Finally, he saw several plumes of nuclear fire, breached reactors tearing at the surface of the planet as they detonated. Perfect! Alpharius cheered, giving Magnus a polite clap as he continued. Another strike like that and the Necron's shield will be weak enough for us to teleport down. Those Imperials had the right idea when they took down the world engine all those millennia ago. I could have opened the shield myself if you had asked, Magnus replied, picking out another squadron to hurl against the planet, selecting a few larger ships to make more of an impact. None of this petty waste of ships. Perhaps it is a bit wasteful, Alpharius said. But as the Necrons seemed adept at weeding out my sleeper agents, I have to use what is available to me. Magnus said nothing, watching as another squadron of ships began their suicide run towards Solemnus. The Necrons were more prepared now, a massive ship slicing two of the squadron in half with its weapons, but the remainder continued on their way to their doom even as the Necrons stripped them apart. Soon, several more nuclear plumes blossomed over Solemnus, Magnus feeling for the first time a subtle pulse upon the planet. Now, isn't that interesting? The shield is down. Alpharius said. Take your sons through before the Xenos close our window of opportunity. Magnus nodded, focusing his magic once more as he reached through the hold of the ship. 200 rubric marines and a couple thousand of Pachurabos volunteers would make for a good vanguard to Alpharius' attack. The Xenos tech field strained against his power as he constructed portals on the surface. A mortal psyker would have been repulsed if not killed by the strength of the Necrons' defenses, the potent mixture of Blackstone and alien technology working quickly to counter and nullify any residual warp craft that tried to slip through. Magnus was no mortal, though. A portal opened before Magnus, the Daemon Primarch flying through with a single flap of his wings. The bridge of Alpharius' flagship disappeared, replaced by a wide field of blackened metal, legions of Necrons marching forward to counter the screaming hordes of cultists and the quiet ranks of Magnus' 1,000 sons. None seemed to have noticed him yet, giving him a chance to size up the battlefield. The cultists died, screaming praise to the Dark God and to the Primarches as Necron gauze weapons stripped them down to dust. Their rusty autoguns and stubbers did little against the alien metal, perhaps knocking down one or two in the unending legions of Xenos before their own ranks were slaughtered. Pressed on by taskmasters and the quietly advancing rubrics, the cultists had nowhere to go but forward, eager to try and gain some kind of glory before their ultimate demise. As the cultist screen collapsed, the rubrics entered the fray. Inferno bolt guns and Soul Reaper cannons blazed, their warp-enhanced ammunition slicing through the Necrons with ease. As with the autoguns, it was not enough to permanently kill the Xenos machines, but the rubrics' weapons did leave more lasting damage to the phalanx. Magnus would leave the chaff to his sons. The greater targets he would take for himself. Magnus channeled his magic as he dove down, targeting a command vehicle directing the phalanx as his first target. The Necrons had noticed him as he dove, but could not bring their weapons to bear before he struck, sweeping his blade through the vehicle and its occupant with little difficulty. The two halves of the vehicle skipped away from Magnus before exploding, showering the phalanxes with burning metal as Magnus advanced into the rear of the Necron lines. A blue shield deflected gauze and Tesla fire, Magnus barely noticing as he sent a quartet of doom bolts hurtling towards an advancing spider-like walker. Magnus was not like Mortarion or Angron, who eagerly sought out the melee in combat. But he could still appreciate the thrill of it all. A beat of his wings carried him forward, Magnus smashing his halberd into the ground to disperse a rank of Litguard. He brought his power forward as the Xenos machines reassembled themselves, blue flames blossoming out to melt those that had not been whisked away down to slag. More Necrons advanced to bring their weapons against him, Magnus dodging to the side before swiping his hand downward, a wall of force smashing into the machines from above. Magnus stepped back, bracing as heavier fire power smashed into his shield. He twisted his free hand over his head, lightning crackling in his palm as he drew in more power. 4 orbs of light appeared before him, each one flickering with the color of one of the fallen 4. Anywhere else, and each one would be a potent singularity to summon a greater daemon into the battle, but with the nulling effects of the Necron's shield and the copious amount of Blackstone, Magnus would have to employ a more brutish use. He flicked his hand, each orb of energy spinning as a low whine filled the air. Once a sufficient amount of energy had formed up, the Primarch cast them towards the Necron ranks, each one bouncing through the air until they found a suitable position overhead. They promptly imploded, reality itself ripping asunder as Blackstone, Necrons, and dead cultists were dragged into the warp, never to be seen again. All that remained were 4 glowing holes on the air, patches of unreality seeping through to try and snare any that dared stray close. Child's play. Magnus would have done more, but a flicker of magic in the distance drew his attention. At first he passed it off as some of Alpharius' minions or one of his sons attempting a more powerful spell, but the residual energies. That is not chaos. He conjured another firestorm before backing away, finding a sorcerer among the ranks of the rubrics as the Necrons rallied for a second strike. "My lord," the sorcerer said, absorbing one Necron shot and returning it in a doom bolt. What is it that troubles you? There is a warp disturbance, he said. I will investigate it and see if perhaps it might be turned for our purposes. Hold the line, we only need to distract the Xenos long enough for Alphareus to steal the Anatheim. As you command, my lord. Magnus took flight again, swooping over the ranks of allies and enemies alike in search of the source of the magic. The Necrons would be of no use, as their lack of souls meant they could do little to manipulate the warp, so he reached his senses out further, scouring every artificial break, monolith, and hill for sign of life. He finally spotted it nestled between two pylons to the north of his landing zone. The Necrons did not appear to have as heavy a position in this sector, so he did not need to worry about drawing too much attention, for now. As he descended upon the source, Magnus sized up his opponents. The first was a member of the 18 Legion, easily distinguishable by his green armor, flame weapons, and drake-scale cape. Beyond, Magnus could see a small grouping of those ridiculous sprites of the Emperor dressed in black armor and red robes marked from decades of warfare, save for one that appeared to have a golden narthecium strapped to her wrist. They were crowded around a green coffin, marked with flames and Nocturne's script, no doubt a relic of Fukin's lost to the Xenos long ago. If Alphareus fails to secure the sword, this might make a welcome prize. But it was the final member of the Loyalists that caught Magnus' attention, a young woman dressed in lavender armor, a silver sword in one hand while the other maintained a violet psychic shield. Magnus reached out with his power, pressing against the shield just enough to get a feel for the energy the woman projected. It was her. The girl from the fleet. The one who had spoken against Lorgar. Alpharius Spark. Not even Fukin's coffin would match to what he could glean from her. You, he growled, aiming his blade at the woman. What are you, child? The girl did not answer, shying away from Magnus' blade as she met his gaze. He was prepared to advance on her before the loyalist Astaroths stepped between the two of them, preparing to receive whatever Magnus brought against him. Loyalist, Magnus said, looking down at the Astaroths. You stand in my way. Move, and your deaths will be painless. Never, the Astaroths said, taking his spear in both hands. We are faithful servants of the Empress, and will never yield to a monster like you. That was not a request, fool. Magnus swept his blade low, a curtain of flames trailing after it as he struck against the salamander. The Astaroths ducked away, but not quick enough to avoid the flat of Magnus' blade. There was a crunch of breaking ceramite as the Forge Father was lifted off his feet, his helmet and spear spinning away as he was knocked several meters to the Primarch's right. The man survived, groaning as he tried to pull himself back to his feet before crumpling back to the ground. Mirshen, the woman in lavender cried, dropping her shield as she rushed towards the fallen Astaroths. Magnus swung his blade again, the girl leaping back as the head of the weapon crashed into the black stone in front of her. Do not think you can escape my gaze, child, he said, moving to place himself between the girl and his previous victim. You are the girl who stared down Lorgar. I would commend you on your bravery, if we were not set against each other like this. The girl said nothing, swallowing as she took her sword in both hands. You think to fight me? You hurt my friend, she said, her voice shaking ever so slightly. I swear by all the power I have, you will not get away with that. What power? Magnus asked, sweeping his blade around and flaring his wings. I am Magnus the Red, the mightiest sorcerer to grace the warp and the Materium. Reality itself is beholden to my words, and the daemons of all fallen gods dance to my tune. I have slain countless warriors greater than you, and yet you claim to be my doom? Come then, and show me what it is about you that makes my brothers fear you. Magnus took his blade in a two-handed grip and leapt forward, sweeping the halberd down towards the woman's head. She winked out in a burst of purple light, just as the blade would have split her from head to toe. Magnus snapped his head around, watching as the girl reappeared near a fallen pylon, flicking her hand forward toward Magnus. Magnus clenched his hand, his shield flaring to life just as the air around him exploded into a flurry of purple sparks. He rushed forward again, shifting his magic as green flames engulfed his fist, bearing down on the girl as she swept her left hand down across her body. With a roar Magnus launched a great fireball, but the girl's speed enhancement allowed her to dance away from the attack with little difficulty. Clever, Magnus said, striking out with his weapon but catching another shield for his trouble. You have a good sense of your power and the creativity to use it beyond mere parlor tricks. I would almost be impressed if you were not so feeble. He flicked his right hand open before closing it into a fist, blue tentacles materializing from the ground and lashing around the woman's legs and arms. He brought his fist downward, the tentacles yanking against the girl in an attempt to rip her apart. I tire of our game. Surrender now, or die. And never. Purple flames exploded around the girl, burning away Magnus' bindings as she drew back. She swept her hands down to channel more lightning, sparks running down her armor and sword before she launched it towards Magnus' head. He stepped back, reaching out his hand to catch the blast before crushing it into nothingness with his fist. The girl teleported again, but Magnus slammed the butt of his halberd into the ground, a shockwave racing out and knocking his opponent off her feet once she reappeared. Magnus raced forward, sweeping his halberd with one hand in a wild swing towards the woman. She raised a shield, which provided her only a few seconds of protection before Magnus struck, and while the defense deflected his blade, the shield shattered and left a sizable crater in the black stone beneath her. The woman slumped over, stunned from the strike while Magnus loomed over her. Feeble, Magnus growled. If you are truly all the Emperor has to offer, I pity mankind. The woman pulled herself back to her feet, swaying slightly as she looked up at the Daemon Primarch. You still try to stand. You threaten the existence of humanity, and you hurt my friend, the woman said, taking up her sword in defiance. I'll do whatever it takes to stop you, even if I'm killed in the process. Typical imperial psychosis, thinking that sacrificing yourself means anything to the survival of those around you. Magnus brought his blade around to stab the woman, but she teleported again and appeared closer to the fallen Astaroths. She seemed more focused on helping him back to his feet than battling Magnus, giving the Daemon Primarch more than enough time to regroup and take stock of the situation. His fight had drawn attention. More exotic creatures of the Necrons, those ghost-like machines they called wraiths, had started to drift towards the fight in search of enemies to kill. Magnus was confident he could destroy them without much trouble, but doing so would risk allowing the Imperials to escape. One opponent at a time. Magnus stalked forward, shifting his power so his halberd morphed into a full Kapesh. The salamander stepped forward, taking his spear in both hands while the girl and her fellows worked to move the unbound flame away from the battle. Get out of my way, loyalist, Magnus growled. Or must I strike you down a second time? You strike only flesh, Daemon. The salamander replied, raising his spear to his shoulder. I am Mirshen, son of Fukin, defender of the Imperium and champion of the Empress. I will never succumb to you, no matter what wounds you strike me with. As stubborn as ever, aren't you? Magnus focused, a bolt of pure energy shooting forward from the gap between the horns on his head. The Astaroths leapt aside, barely avoiding the bolt as it melted the black stone beneath him to slag. Magnus wanted to avoid the man and charge straight at the girl, lest she get away with the unbound flame, but the salamander was not so easy to put down. He rolled back to his feet and lashed out, his spear flickering as it passed through Magnus' defenses and sank into his thigh. The Daemon Primarch howled, wrenching his leg back as the salamander staggered forward, always keeping himself between the retreating women and Magnus. Insolent worm! Magnus bellowed, conjuring up more power. Tendrils lashed around the Astarte's legs, and unlike the girl he had no powers of his own to break through. Do what your misbegotten ilk were designed for and die. For my friends, I do so gladly, the Astaroths said, calmly closing his eyes as Magnus launched a doom bolt towards his head. It was not a particularly powerful doom bolt, not even for the Primarch, but it was still more than enough to punch through the loyalist's skull and down through his body, exploding his armor outward so all that remained was his cloak, the gauntlet, and his spear. Said artifacts were knocked through the air, skidding across the ground until they came to a rest next to the woman and her group. To see the despair on the girl's face was a sight Magnus had seen played out countless times across the centuries, a hollow gaze, broken by shimmering tears, whatever light of hope having been shattered beyond repair. Magnus had once served the god of hope and change, yet to see this one broken. You should have known better than to place your trust in the strength of that lot, he said, resuming his march towards the humans. The women in black armor raised their weapons, Magnus using only the slightest amount of power to deflect the bolter shells. The only power is that which you possess within, and I find it lacking. Don't worry, I'll make this painless. Magnus whipped his sword over his head, a curtain of fire forming before he sent it hurtling towards the Imperials. It should have been a quick kill. Even the greatest of psychers would have trouble holding back to torrent. But before the flames could connect, the enemy psyker let out a feral shriek and thrust her hands forward, a bolt of pure magic blasting apart Magnus' attack and streaking through the air towards him. Magnus reeled back as the bolt exploded in his face, purple flames digging into his flesh and hissing as his magic tried to contain them. Most warp flame burned like the real thing until properly extinguished, but this, if anything, it tickled, a quick soothing feeling following soon after the initial flash of pain. Magnus would have been fascinated, were it not for the fact the damn flames had burned his eye. I am losing my patience with you. He roared, slamming his sword against the ground to create a wall of force. The strike knocked the Imperials over, preventing them from attacking him once more as he conjured another doom bolt. Your skill is substantial, but your fighting is pointless. Now witness the true power of the warp. Magnus launched the doom bolt forward, pouring as much hatred and malice as he could into the spell. There was a flash followed by a deafening explosion, several curious wraiths bowled over by the force of the blast. As the dust cleared, Magnus rushed forward to finish off any that remained. But as he charged through the smoke, all he found was thin air, not a single sign of the presence of the girl and her followers save for a small pinprick of violet light. Magnus paused, dismissing his sword as he reached down to pluck the light from thin air, turning it over in his hand several times to get a feel for its energies. It is still strong, he mused. That means she's still alive, some kind of teleportation over long distance. Interesting. He would have loved to inspect the magic more closely, but the wraiths chose that moment to attack, whipping their coiled blades at the Primarch as he brought his shield to deflect them. He took flight, wrenching a nearby pylon out of the ground and hurling it at the machines, but they merely phased through it in their quest to attack the Primarch. Magnus. It was Alfarius, using a psyker to communicate with him. We are being hard-pressed. Where are you? Apologies. I thought I saw something that could have been of use. I will resume our attack. Alfarius' minion said nothing, allowing Magnus a moment to cast a fireball at the wraiths and turn back towards the battlefield. In the distance, he could feel the spark of the girl's magic once more, a faint light amongst the darkness of solemnness, but he forced the thought from his mind. Hunting the girl could wait. For now, he had a mission to complete.